our domestic violence law covers all the family or household members. So it's broader than just intimate partners. But the domestic violence court focuses its energy and resources on intimate partner violence because the dynamics in that relationship tend to be the more difficult dynamics to work with in the system. So the other cases that fall under the same law are heard in other courts. So we deal only in that court with intimate partner violence.
So how is the difference of the perspective between the federal law of domestic violence and also the state law of the domestic violence? How is it going? What's the differences in that?
Okay, well, and I can speak to state law better than I can to federal law. The federal law does prohibit the possession of firearms and ammunition by anyone who has been convicted of an act of domestic violence against an intimate partner. There's a specific definition in the federal law that prohibits possession of a firearm if you have been convicted of that level of offense. State law in Minnesota, the acts of domestic violence are prosecuted by the state prosecuting authorities, not by the federal authorities, with the exception you and I talked about before the show, dealing with the reservation lands that are, they have jurisdiction over the reservation lands. But otherwise, the acts of domestic violence are prosecuted and handled by local authorities, not the federal authorities.
So, okay, you as the district court judge, I know you were also combating the domestic violence there. What are the most obstacles that you are having right now?
The most
obstacles?
Oh,
the biggest one?
I think it's always a matter of resources, and the importance of having advocacy services for victims at the time that the incident is reported is of critical importance. And the advocate services, I'm sure that it's true here too, that there just aren't enough advocacy services to serve the need that's there in the community. The people who fill those positions are dedicated professionals, and they are not compensated as well as they should be, for sure. And there aren't enough of them, and the jobs aren't financially rewarding enough for them to stay in them for a long time, although many do, despite the lack of financial reward. So I would say that resources is always an issue. We work very hard on communication among the different community organizations that are involved, different agencies that are involved in domestic violence. So advocates, law enforcement, probation, the courts, law enforcement. We have different groups where we can, there are committees that we get together and discuss what we're doing in domestic violence so that the most efficient and effective measures are taken to implement our law.
Okay, so you just said about the advocacy services. So is it the advocacy service, is it very easy to be accessed by people back in Minnesota?
Well, every police agency has an advocate program that they are aligned with. So when a police officer responds to a call of domestic violence, he is obligated by law to put the victim in touch with an advocate at the scene. What would be ideal would be for there to be phone contact with an advocate that night so that the advocate gets the victim's information and calls the victim. And it's a very difficult position for victims to be in. And it's what we try to do is to have the system respond to the victim so that the onus isn't on the victim to protect herself, but that the system will be responsive and protect her.
Okay, so I want to I want to separate I want to discern and distinguish about the social aspects of the victims itself. Maybe, well, some of them elderlies, maybe they used to be a victims also, and children also. But based on the numbers perspective, which one is the biggest one?
Oh, I know that there's research on this. My guess is that it would be the age of greatest incidence of crime, which is 18 to 50. Domestic violence, we do see it among the elderly, but I think that what we see most often is offenders in their 20s and 30s. There's also teen dating violence, but I won't see that in my adult court.
20 to 30. So if we try to analyze the category itself, 20 to 30s, what makes this the biggest number of the committing domestic violence there?
Well, that tends to be the years when offenders are more likely to commit all offenses, and that's why I say that. I'd have to look at the research. I know that there's research on this, so I'd have to look at the research to see what it says about where the highest grouping of offenders is. I do know that it's across all socioeconomic groups. So those who are wealthy, those who are poor, it crosses cultures, and Minnesota is a diverse community. We have people from all different backgrounds who live in Minnesota. And domestic violence, it occurs in all sectors of our community.
Okay. So you're very well experienced in these things. So if I ask you what was the worst case that you've been faced through your dedication in this area, what are they? What are the worst that you've seen?
There have been a number of them. The last case that I had as a prosecutor was very difficult. That was a homicide. The people who lived nearby felt there was an issue, that there was a problem in the relationship, but didn't know whether they could intervene. They didn't know the depth of the problem, and so they didn't feel comfortable intervening. It's hard to predict who could kill their partner. But those are devastating cases. And we've had, in Minnesota, very sadly, I believe we had in 2013, 37 domestic homicides, which is extraordinary. That's more than, I think the year before we had 22. So it's a dramatic increase and very disturbing.
Okay, so recently we had an issues here in Indonesia. It's domestic violence actually. So there's a guy, so he's having another relationship with his new girlfriend, and both of them is torturing his own ex-girlfriend in the car more than 20 hours on the same day, and finally the ex-girlfriend got killed and they threw them away like that. So I believe it is very, very bad to be happen, and the motives also, like you said, is
horrific.
I would like to know your own opinion as a court judge, which you have so many experience in dealing with domestic violence. So how do you see this?
How do I see that? Well, it's a horrible tragedy. There are so many questions I would have about it, about the nature of the relationship between the man and the first girlfriend who was killed, the relationship between him and the second girlfriend, the relationship between the second girlfriend and the first girlfriend, because I think you told me before the show that they had been high school friends.
Yeah, they were in the same high school.
And there are just so many questions I would have about the relationships that are involved and how that ended how that was the result. It's just shocking.
Okay. Is a similar cases also happen maybe?
Oh, sadly, yes. And I can't think of one now, but I just can't imagine that something like that hasn't happened.
And how did you prosecute those kind of cases in Minnesota?
Well, you do, I mean, you look at who is the most culpable.
Okay.
And then your time and your resources go toward that case, and you would prosecute everyone responsible, but you do need to assess culpability, relative culpability. When a case in which there are two or more actors committing a crime, and you do have to look at the people involved and what motivated them, and how they ended up in that position.
Okay, our time is very limited, but I have personal questions for you.
Okay.
So it's more into your careers itself.
Okay.
So one day you are going to retire, and what is the objective that you are still pursuing at the moment in combating the domestic violence?
What would I like to see different in Minnesota?
Up to you.
Is that what you want me to say?
Yeah.
Oh, I would two things. I would like to see, we have, if you are convicted of what is defined as a crime of violence, you cannot possess a firearm. Domestic violence is not included in crimes of violence. So there are a number of offenses that are, but felony level domestic violence is not included. So that would be one change I would like to see to Minnesota's law. Second change I would like to see is I would like to have, as Brooklyn, New York has, a domestic violence court for all domestic violence offenders in Hennepin County. The goal of a domestic violence court serves the purposes of the court and the community, which that's my goal as a judge, is to serve the community, and in domestic violence cases, having cases heard in a quick fashion and not having them unduly delayed is a goal of domestic violence court, so that an offender who is brought before the court, the case is handled and resolved in a relatively short period, rather than with the regular criminal calendar, cases can drag out. Also, having experienced judges, experienced probation officers, and prosecutors and defense attorneys who know domestic violence and know the law and are able to handle the cases appropriately.
Okay, well, good luck on that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to have you here.
Oh, it's an honor to be here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So that was all for today, and we're going back to the studio. I'm gonna just signing off. See you again.
That was Canon Judge in an interview with Judge Elizabeth Cutter.